Hello, and welcome to another Malazan Book of the Fallen video. If you're watching this, I suspect it's because you just finished up your last fantasy book and are looking for something else to read, or you've already read the Malazan novels and you want to dive back in. So, in this video, we're going to talk about what to expect and where to get started if you decide to take this bad boy on. Let's go. So first things first, I just want to talk about what you can expect getting into the Malazan world because definitely not something that's for the faint of heart. It's actually a pretty huge commitment. So as of today, and I'm recording this in late 2019, there's already 21 completed books, another 6 novellas, and then 4 books that are still planned coming down the pike. So when you put it all together, I think it's already, just with what's been published as of right now, almost 18,000 paperback pages long. And just to give you some context there, I think that the entire Wheel of Time, which consists of about 13 books, is about 12,000 pages. So you're talking about something that's already 50% longer than one of the longest fantasy series that's already out there, and it's not even done yet. So a huge commitment. The books range anywhere from about 300 pages, which is the first book, Knight of Knives, in the Crimson Guard portion of this series, all the way up to almost 1,300 pages in Toll the Hounds, which is part of the main Malazan Book of the Fallen. So just an absolutely epic and humongous thing that you're going to be taking on, and it's going to take you a lot of time to get through it, but that's just something to be aware of as you dive in. So I think, when it's all said and done and these last 4 books are published, this will probably end up being one of the longest epic fantasy series of all time, if it isn't already. So in terms of just size and scale and epicness, this one checks those boxes for sure, but you are taking on that big commitment. So that's kind of like what you can expect in terms of just the time commitment that you're putting forward. But what else can you expect as you get into the books? Well, for me at least, I think one of the main takeaways, at least on that first read through, is that you can expect to be pretty confused. When you're talking about this many pages, and also just the nature of the world, there's a lot going on. Just in terms of the overall geography, the scope of the world is absolutely massive. So you have about 17 different nations slash continents out there, and unlike many of these other fantasy books out there where you hear about these big giant worlds and 17, 18 continents or nations or what have you, they're really just nations that are touched on kind of in passing or mentioned as part of the history. A huge chunk, whether it's the kind of 7 cities, Genebacus, Darujistan, Pale, Lether, you name it. We actually visit a huge chunk of those 17 nations slash continents out there. And so you really actually get deeply immersed in the world. The downside to that, though, is that it can get confusing. Where's that guy from again? Who's this girl? She's the general of what army? And so there's just a lot to keep track of in terms of the sheer volume of nations and peoples that are actually covered as really main characters of this book. And they're all kind of really fleshed out too. We have all different types of governance structures, ruling parties, and they're all separate, distinct, and kind of have their own senses of humor, their own ways of talking, the metaphors they use, and all that good stuff. So they're really distinct, separate, and very well fleshed out. And so that's one of the things that makes this series so awesome to read, is just all the volume of detail that you get and just how amazingly fleshed out the world actually is. But again, just how much stuff you have to keep track of means that first read through, you're probably going to be fairly confused. That's why I highly recommend reading the series for the first go round on the Kindle, so that way you can kind of do your highlighting, make notes and all of that stuff, and also search back, where was that person from, or when did we see them? Oh yeah, that was in this chapter. So the Kindle is really a great tool to be able to tackle the series, just because of how much different stuff you have to navigate, and that might help you keep track of some of it. And it's not just the geographic scope, right? There's also just a lot of different peoples. So I think in total there's about 12 races, depending on how you measure them, but races definitely play a huge role, and that just adds to the complexity of the story. In addition to all the geographic spread that you have, elder races, you have these humanoid type races, which are people who basically look a lot like how we look in this world, but then you have everything running from that to the whole gamut, including giants and all kinds of other races and looks and feels to the characters in this story. So it's not just a human story. You have the whole gamut of fantasy characters and fantasy races in this book. And I think that what makes it even more complex is that you have the kind of what they call the elder races, right? And we have a huge multiple millennia, thousands and thousands of years worth of history that's playing out over the course of these stories. And so that, in addition to the fact that even within all of these races, you have all kinds of different factions and folks vying for power, even within their own race, their own nation, their own culture, that really kind of makes it very dynamic and complex, and what makes it so much fun to read, but which also makes it hard to grasp on that first time around. So you are making a big commitment in terms of both the time and also just the sheer volume of folks that you're going to be interacting with and learning about, which makes it fun, but it also makes it kind of confusing. The other thing that makes this really complex and dynamic is the magic system, right? So if you go to something like maybe the Wheel of Time, which I refer to just because I think that's one that folks are more familiar with, right? The magic system, or even in Mistborn or something like that, is fairly well defined, and it's really just one source or one type of magic. In the Wheel of Time, that would be channeling, right? And in Mistborn, you have metal burners who have, within that kind of broad umbrella, you have several different types of folks who can burn different metals. But in the Malazan books, you really have a lot of different magic systems. So magic is accessed via what's known as warrens in the book. And so these warrens are basically extra dimensions, basically, or other realms that are really tied to gods that are present in the book, either by reference or we directly see them in the stories. But all these different mages, witches, warlocks, what have you, access different types of magics, and all these different warrens have different rules, different ways that the magics are used, and what they can be actually used for. And in general, you have characters who can really tap into magic from one type of god or one type of warren or another, although you do have some really super powerful mages and witches who can actually access magics from a whole variety of warrens. But that just adds to the complexity, because you have both the what they call the elder gods and these elder warrens, the magics associated with these elder gods, and then you have the newer gods, and I use that term fairly loosely because you're still talking about multiple millennia of years old on these new gods and the new warrens, but just a lot to keep track of in terms of what types of magic are out there being used and how that actually plays into the story. The magic is definitely front and center in the story, but it really just is there as a tool to kind of really flesh out the world, and it isn't necessarily about magic per se. At the end of the day, I think what makes this series so great is that even though you do have a lot of magics and those kind of high fantasy elements in there, these are really character-driven stories, right? You really get invested in these hundreds and hundreds of different characters and races and nations and what's going on, and even the dynamics with the gods who are kind of manipulating things from up on high and actually play an active role in the story. And so, lots of complexity and richness, but a lot to keep track of too again. And so that's kind of what you can expect from just a commitment standpoint and kind of an overview of what you're getting into, both time commitment wise and just the whole overall scope and scale, which is absolutely massive. And hopefully that's something that makes it attractive and makes it really fun, because unlike some of these other stories where you kind of get in and you really get a quick summary or a recap of all the history really is what's driving the overall story here, and what makes it so rich and just so much fun to read. So, hopefully I haven't scared you off too bad. If you're still around, I think that the next step is to really talk about what we can expect in terms of the actual experience of reading the book, right? Aside from just the haul of actually getting it done, what can we expect in terms of just the experience of reading these books and actually diving in and really enjoying them? So the first thing I'll say is that gets real. You have a lot of folks dying. You get really invested in these characters, and it really kind of feels like the carpet is always getting pulled out from under you, and so you're always kind of have this element of suspense or feeling like you're on the edge of your seat, or at least that you never know what way things are going to go or what's going to happen. There's also just a ton of military battles, so military war fighting plays a huge role in the series. That underscores basically every single one of the books, and you're seeing all kinds of different battles, preparations for battles, planning for battles, and really the politics and society and the military aspect are all kind of interweaved and threaded throughout the entire 21 books that we've read so far. I definitely would not consider this kind of a young adult, whereas something like a Realm of the Elderlings or a Wheel of Time, I think you could pick that up in your early teens and be good to go. There is adult, obviously, content in those stories, but just the dark, gritty nature of the Malazan world, to me, makes it something that's a little bit more adult and a little bit less young adult. So very dark, very gritty, but also very realistic and real, if that can be said in a kind of high fantasy world. But really there's a lot of graphic violence, sexual content, not always in a positive way, right? There's lots of bad stuff happening throughout, and so definitely want to kind of have that disclaimer to read at your own risk, because again, gets pretty deep. So what else can we expect from these books? I think the other thing, in addition to just being prepared to be confused, is be prepared to get kind of sad, right? I already mentioned this a little bit, but you have a lot of these characters who are dying, who are going away, who you become very invested in, and then all of a sudden something happens. And so, and just, overall, I think one of the core themes, and I'll post a link to a video that does a really great job of talking about the themes of just kind of pain and suffering as one of those central themes that really underscores the entire series. And so, not just that some of your favorite characters may or may not die, but also just the themes of suffering and really, folks experiencing life that is less than ideal, right? You don't have folks who are just, having it easy and living the dream life. Even those folks in really high power positions, aren't kind of skating by on easy street. And so there's just a lot of grit and realism, sadness, suffering, pain that goes into a lot of these characters, which again is what makes it really realistic, but which is also what makes it such a big, not just time commitment, but also a big emotional commitment, because you're getting wrapped up in these characters and you're kind of going through this pain and suffering with them, which makes it, very real and exciting to read, and you really get very invested and engrossed. But at sometimes you feel like you gotta kind of take a step back because your heart's pumping, or you feel like you're having an anxiety attack or something like that. And I think, although that can be hard for the faint of heart, it also is what makes it so fun and exciting to read, is that you really do feel that investment with these characters and into this world. And, I definitely wouldn't blame you if you get through that first read and you're like, what did I just read? What just happened? Because I felt like that too. I'm just now embarking on my third reread, so I've been through all 18,000 pages twice already, and now as I'm getting back into Gardens of the Moon, I'm just finally starting to feel like I really have my arms wrapped around this world, the characters, all the different motivations, and I think that this is one of those stories where you'll really want to come back over and over and just keep diving in, because there's just so many different nooks and crannies to explore, all the different motivations, the socio-political things that are boiling under the surface that you're able to read and appreciate on that first pass through, but to really be able to get in there and dissect it, it's probably going to take you a couple of rounds. The good news is it's so good and it's so entertaining that you're excited to jump right back in, but that's one of the things I think that really sets this series apart from some of the other ones out there. So yeah, ultimately I think this is a really big commitment of time and emotional energy and things like that, but because it's one of the best series that I've read, even all that stuff notwithstanding, I can still highly recommend it as one of the most enjoyable and best things I've ever done in terms of reading a book in my life, and just really got a lot out of it. It's very mature and adult, and challenged me mentally, emotionally, all that stuff in a way that I just found really, really fun. So if you're still here and I haven't scared you off at this point, where should we begin if you want to start these books, right? Because I mentioned that there is 21 books already completed in the series. You do have two separate prequel volumes, right? So for me, I consider the main series, the main kind of heart of the series, to be both Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is a 10-book volume written by Steven Erikson, as well as the novels of the Malazan Empire, which were written by his friend and partner Ian C. Esselmont, and that's a 6-book series that both kind of cross paths chronologically or overlap chronologically. They're both kind of going on at the same time. There is 2 prequel volumes. So one is called the Kharkanas Trilogy, and that one actually takes place a couple of thousand years at least. It's not very clear, but definitely several thousand years before the events of the main series. And that deals with some of the elder races that will come to meet in the main series, as well as the second prequel volume, which is known as Path to Ascendancy. Both of these prequel volumes are 3-book series, but I actually would start with the main series first and then go back to the prequels after you've made it through what I would call that core series. I've actually linked down below in the description the author's suggested order for reading the entire series, and overall I generally agree with that. And it's kind of, again, not to keep beating the Wheel of Time kind of comparisons to death, but for me, I think it's kind of akin to going back and reading New Spring, right? New Spring is a great book in the Wheel of Time series, and it takes place before the events of the main series. But for me, that's not the place you want to start Wheel of Time. Lan and Moraine's stories are definitely engrossing, and we all really care about them, but really only after we've read the whole series and we become invested in their stories and what happened to them, and kind of wanting to know how you get there. Otherwise, if you start on New Spring, it can feel kind of boring, right? Like, what's going on? There's not that major conflict that takes place in the main series, and that's kind of the case here in the Malazan world as well. So what I would do is I would read through, in that suggested reading order, the main heart of the series. Then I would go back and read the Kharkanas Trilogy and Path to Ascendancy, which you can really tackle in any order on those prequels, because then you're kind of really engrossed in the series, you're invested in those characters, and when you go back to the beginning, you really see kind of the roots and the origin stories of a lot of these characters, and that makes it really fun because, in the main series, these are oftentimes folks who've risen to kind of mythological status for the characters in the main series, and to go back then after you've been introduced to these kind of godlike characters, or in some cases they are gods, it just makes it a lot more fun once you have that kind of pre-introduction. So tackle that main series, then go back and tackle the prequel series, and that's how I would do it. I have, again, links down below to both the reading order as well as all of the links to the different Kindle editions of all the books. I think if you click on those links, you'll actually get the option to see, you know, the paperback or hardback if you're into that. I just like the Kindle because I'm churning through a lot of different books at one time. Don't have as much room in my backpack, so hopefully that helps, but that's how I would tackle it. So yeah, that's kind of my recap of what to expect and how to get started on the Malazan world. I highly recommend it. I know I threw out a lot of disclaimers and kind of just kept it really real about what kind of investment is involved, but I really do think for some folks this is going to be one of the best things that you can do. Again, it's not for the faint of heart, but I'm pretty sure that once you dive into Gardens of the Moon, you're going to be hooked in those first kind of 100 pages. And from there on out, you're just going to want to be turning those pages to find out what happens next. So for me, what we're going to try and do is start off with Gardens of the Moon over the course of the next couple of weeks and dive back in on this third reread. We'll be trying to put up a new video every week, hopefully on Sundays. And we'll just go from there. I'm super excited to get going on this channel. I don't know anything about running a booktube channel or anything like that, but just really love the series. Don't have a lot of friends that I can talk about it with, and so hopefully, definitely don't have all the answers either. I'm really looking to you guys to stimulate conversations where we can spitball and throw theories around and just kind of have fun enjoying and celebrating the series. And for me, even on my third read through, there's still lots of question marks that I have and lots of things still left for me to explore and different themes that I want to touch on and just really try and get down and dirty with. So hopefully I've kind of inspired you to come along for the ride. It really is one of my favorite and funnest series that I've ever read, and just really looking forward to kind of getting some more folks in here to kind of nerd out with me on this stuff, because I read this the first time through several years ago, and then it's like one of these good movies that you watch by yourself, and then you're like looking around at the end just like brewing like, I need to talk to someone about this. So hopefully you guys are active in the comments. Thank you guys so much for stopping by to check out the channel. I'm really excited to dive back into these books with you. If you like the content and you want to come along for the ride, make sure to click subscribe, turn on those post notifications so that you never miss a video. Give the video a thumbs up so that we can hopefully get promoted by YouTube and get more folks into the channel. That'll just really help to enrich the discussion and really, get us on the next level in terms of really enjoying this series. So thank you so much for watching. We'll be putting out another video next week, and until then, happy reading.